Alright, I wanted to take you guys through an edit in Lightroom and just show you what all of the different functions can do. It's a pretty powerful tool, Lightroom is, so just want to make sure you guys know everything it can do and everything you should be doing to a RAW file. You can edit JPEG photos in Lightroom. You just won't have the dynamic range to really be able to correct them if something were to go wrong and you need to adjust the exposure or anything like that. You won't really be able to do much with it, but you can still do some of these changes to a JPEG file. But I'm going to show you with a RAW image. So this is one that we took at the workshop, and this is what it looks like straight out of the camera. So I just opened up the file into Lightroom, and all of the adjustments are over here on the right hand side, and you have all these other different little things here that you can open. I'm on the edit tab. There's also the crop tab, the healing tab, the adjustment brush tab, and the gradient tabs, but I'm gonna just show you the main one with the exposure and the contrast, and this is where you're going to want to start with every single photo. Most of these are self-explanatory. You're going to have the light, different things you can do with the exposure. So you can go to the right to brighten your image if you underexposed and you need to brighten it up. You can go to the left if you overexposed and you need to take the exposure down. This one was pretty good right out of the camera, so I might not even mess with the exposure, but I'll come back to it. I just want to take you through all of the different functions. So the contrast, I don't usually mess with it too much, but you can see what it does. It adds some contrast to your photo. And then if you go to the left, it takes it away. So you, as the photographer, can decide how you want your photos to look. Now, if you're buying presets, you would actually click the preset first, and then you could go in and make hand adjustments based on each specific image. For the highlights, if you move it to the right, it's going to up your highlights, and then if you move it to the left, it's going to take them down. And you can really see it affects the blanket. She had that white furry blanket on, and so it does bring back some of the detail when you move the highlight slider down. So we'll keep that in mind for when we're start really adjusting this photo. Shadows I don't usually mess a ton with, but you can see where that would kind of come in handy maybe to up the shadows if you like them to be a little brighter or if you like them to be a little richer. You can go to the left. Put that back to 0. The whites is usually more what I adjust for contrast. So if you up the whites, it's going to brighten your image overall, but also kind of keeps the contrast in there, if that makes sense. So it's going to get brighter and keep the contrast, whereas if you just adjust the exposure, it doesn't necessarily add contrast. And I like contrasts, but the whites do. You can kind of see it keeps the blacks dark. Do you guys see that? And when you go and start playing around with your own photos, you'll be able to see it probably a little bit better, but then the blacks are going to darken the image overall, but specifically the blacks get a lot darker. You guys can see that. And then if it's too dark and you want to brighten it, then you can take the blacks to the right, and then you can get creative with it and like up your blacks, but then also up your contrast, just to kind of find the look you're going for with each specific image. But again, this is where presets kind of come in handy to make sure if you want to find a specific editing style that you like and you want to keep it consistent. I'm sorry, my phone. And keep it consistent. It's nice to start with the preset on every single photo, usually the same one, and then you can just adjust these different settings for each specific photo. Does that make sense? So the consistency, I feel like, in this business is key. You want your photos to usually kind of have a style to them. That way when your clients are booking you, they're going to know what the finished photos usually are going to look like. So consistency is pretty important in photography. Okay, so then if you scroll down to the color, the white balance is one of the really important ones, even if you have a really, dark and moody type of editing, or a light and airy editing, or something else. Your color balance or your white balance is something that is going to be the same no matter what. You really want to make sure your whites are white. I usually just adjust it for skin tones. If you adjust just for the white, sometimes the skin tones get all out of whack, and I don't have a lot of time to open up every single photo in Photoshop and then correct for skin to make sure the whites are true white. I just, again, use the white balance to make sure their skin looks good, and then the whites are usually fine. I mean, people get picky, but I feel like it's best as long as their skin looks okay. Then you're not wasting a whole bunch of time. Tint, you probably won't mess with this too much in outdoor photos, depending on the circumstance. I would say for the most part you won't have to. Where you really mess with this more is inside. You get some funky lighting going on in a gymnasium or something like that. You're going to want to mess with the tint a little bit, and then sometimes outside photos. But like for this one, it's on 0, and I wouldn't need to change it to add magenta or add green. So vibrance is something, if you really like your colors to have a lot of color and be super rich, you can up your vibrance, and you can see what it's doing. It's really making the colors like kind of pop, but they just are more rich tones to them. So vibrance is a good thing to up a little bit. I normally up it a little bit in my photos, not always, but I would say a good portion of the time. I usually don't use saturation a lot. It's kind of like vibrance on steroids, where it's really gonna affect the colors and the skin tones in your photos. I don't mess with it a lot, but again, that's totally up to you as the photographer. Clarity, down in the effects, I don't know how else to say this except it will make your photos like, it's kind of like crispy looking. I use this more for landscape photography or buildings. My husband, for his job, I have to take photos for him of building projects that he's done, and I will up the clarity in those. It gives the buildings and landscape a little bit of dimension, but for people it can be kind of harsh, so I don't usually up the clarity. You can take it the other way and it will soften it, which might be more of the look you're going for. And a little bit of clarity isn't bad. So this is kind of one of those where less is more if you're going to play with that slider. The dehaze, if you have a lot of haze in your image, if you're shooting into the sunlight, and if you let too much into your lens, it can really make everything hazy looking, and this is going to take that away. It's kind of like the black slider up here, but it just works to kind of get rid of the haze out of your photo. Now if it's super hazy, this is not going to be a fix, like a fix-all for you, but it will help. And then if there's just a little bit, it usually gets rid of it pretty good. The vignette, if you go to the right, it's going to make it like a white vignette, and if you go to the left, it's going to make it a dark vignette. I don't usually mess with this too much, but some people like it in their photos. Grain, I'm going to zoom in for this one to show you what it does. So when you have a really high ISO, it will add grain to your photos, and the only thing I could think of why you would want to put grain into your photo is if you want it to have like an old school film look. So watch what it does to her skin. See, adding that grain. So if you had a really high ISO, like on a Rebel, if it was like 800 to 1000, this photo might have looked more like this. And but I don't know why you'd want to add grain, but some people like that old school film look. That's the only thing I can think of. So that's what that does. I'm going to leave it zoomed in just to show you. So there's a sharpening tool. I usually don't mess with this too much, but if you go to the right, it's going to make her eyelash. So watch her eyelashes get really sharp. but then you want to be careful because you can see it kind of adds in some pixelation because it's over sharpened. So this is going to be one of those less is more. I don't know why you'd want to take sharpening off, but I guess maybe people like to do that. But you can add a little bit, less is more here, unless you want to start adding that pixelation in. I usually don't mess with the sharpening too much. It's usually fine how my camera does it. Okay, so noise reduction. When we talked about the grain, and if you had a photo that looked like this, without touching the grain, that's just how it looked when you opened it up into Lightroom, straight out of camera, you can add this noise reduction, and it's going to soften the overall image. It's not going to work because I added the grain, but you can watch what it does here. It's going to soften the entire image. You can see how her skin gets softer. And it would actually blur out your grain or your all your noise. It's gonna get rid of all the noise in the image, all that, those dots that you don't want. So that's what that does. And then the color noise reduction does the same thing. You just kind of play with those and it gets rid of the noise and all the grain. Okay, so remove the chromatic aberration. So that is, I usually see that more with lower end lenses. My fisheye does it a lot, so pretty much every photo I have to click this button, but basically it adds like purple hue and sometimes green, and I'll see blue in there as well, usually around the outside of my subject where maybe like I see it a lot on trees, so it would go all around the branches. There would be like a purple outline around each branch or green. So you'd want to click this button. If you see that, if you have it, you'll know. You'll see it in your photo. You click that and it will get rid of it for you. It's super nice. So that's a good one to know about if you see purple hue. I'll try to find a photo and post it in the comments under this video where it has a lot of that. I'll find one for you guys and post it. Lens correction. So you would click this button if you had like a wide angle and there was a lot of distortion. This is going to get rid of that for you. There's also some vignette that your lens just automatically puts in naturally, that will remove that as well. So if I click this, if I was on a super wide angle, you would see more of an adjustment to her, but I'm pretty sure I was at like 70 millimeters. I wasn't at anything super wide, so there won't be a huge adjustment to her face, but you'll see some of the vignette go away on the side, I'm guessing. So let me click that. Yep, so it brightened the image overall just a little bit, and it took away that vignette around the outside of the photo, and then it did fix a little bit of the distortion on her face. So whether or not you click that is totally up to you. I usually don't click it for outdoor images, but I will for my studio photos. So that is that whole line over here on the right for the first tab. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here, and then I'll do a second video for the rest of these tabs. So I'll be right back with you.